It's The World This Week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast foreign editor. Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
Glad to be back.
Glad to have you with us. It's a busy run-up to the holiday season.
And it's not going to stop for the holidays.
It is not, as we're about to find out. Also joining us, Alan Cavall, journalist for French daily newspaper Le Monde, back from the field.
Almost.
All right, almost. Aida Alami, contributor to the New York Times. Nice to see you.
See you too.
And he's graced us with his presence from the first floor newsroom, Henri-Pierre Mafoudou, senior producer at France 24.
Glad to be here.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. You know Dr. Seuss's Grinch Who Stole Christmas? This was the week we discovered the actual person or persons exist. Dateline near Crawley in West Sussex, England, home to the UK's second busiest airport. Flights grounded for a 36-hour period and then grounded again on Friday evening because of drones near the runway.
We believe there are only 1 or 2 drones, but the reality is there's a 1 kilometre ban of drones around an airport, and once you have that breached, then it isn't safe to operate your airport. This is a deliberate act by a perpetrator who sought to generate a huge amount of disruption, and that's exactly what's happened today.
Christopher Dickey, this was, we've seen minor incidents like this, but not over such a long period. What to make of it?
Well, it's pretty scary if you think about it. I mean, it's not just that it's scary because they can fly drones and it disrupts things, even if the drones are doing nothing except hovering around. Obviously, we're reaching a level of technology where it's fairly easy to arm drones as well. And we're going to have a lot of problems with them in the future. Not only with individual drones or 1 or 2, but as we've written about in the Daily Beast, there's going to be a problem with what are called drone swarms, where terrorists or other people who want to cause trouble, maybe criminals who want to use them as cover for a theft, will launch a whole series of drones at a target, say an airport, and the effects will be catastrophic.
Of course, the British tabloids are speculating. The Sun's front page story was Drone Wolf because they have ideas and they're...
There's one lone lunatic, right?
The Daily Telegraph accusing it, saying it might be eco-warriors. The police are shying away from any such speculation for now.
Well, prudently, yes, because I don't think they have the slightest idea at this point who it is who's doing it.
It's you remember a few years back, Alan Cavall, when Amazon said they were going to perhaps be able to deliver parcels by drones. What do you make of this story now when you see this going on just in the run-up to Christmas?
Oh, well, it's quite surprising and quite worrying, actually. But, I don't take plane anymore. I live in Paris, so that's fine.
So you don't take the plane as much. Henri-Pierre Mafoudou?
Well, there's one key word: regulate, regulate, regulate. They've been talking about it for months, perhaps years. Talking about this Amazon plan, a grand plan of flying stuff over that you could get within minutes or hours. We go back to it, back to square one right now.
Back to square one. Aida Alami?
I kind of agree. Like, how do you so easily get access to these things and just create so much disruption? And they need to maybe figure out how to...
Ban drones, maybe?
I don't know. Maybe.
That's impossible.
I mean, the variety that's available now commercially is unbelievable. I mean, and gets pushed more and more and more. You go into the department stores here, the ones that specialize in electronics and that kind of thing, and there are drones all over the place and very affordable.
All right. Will this be the week remembered not so much for drones, but as a turning point for Syria, Afghanistan, and the United States of America? The Defense Secretary, James Mattis, tendering his resignation as Donald Trump declared victory over ISIS in Syria and announced the pullout of the 2,000 U.S. forces there. Mattis sending a strongly worded letter to the president, which he distributed as well at the Pentagon, saying, because you have the right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours on these and other subjects, I believe it is right for me to step down from my position. Your coverage of this, the Daily Beast, pulling no punches about that letter.
Yeah, I don't think we can repeat the paraphrased line that was used, but it was
It's on our Facebook page.
Yeah, it was a real FU to Trump. I mean, there's several things that are striking about it, not just the articulation of the failures of policy, the betrayal of allies, and that. But also there was no kind of effort to sugarcoat it at all. There was no effort to sort of say, I've been proud to serve with you. It's been great. I think we've just had a slight divergence of view, and I'm a little tired and want to spend time with my family. No, it was, you have betrayed allies. You have undermined the North Atlantic Alliance. You have done all these kinds of things that I find unacceptable, and you need to have somebody who can accept these to work with you. And that is a real screw you to Trump.
All right, let's go over what happened exactly, because you had this phone call over the weekend between Trump and Turkey's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And then on the day when the pullout's announced, or the day after, the Turkish president hosting his Iranian counterpart in Ankara, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who's vowed to take on the Kurdish-led forces that control not only northeast Syria, but certain strategic points west of the Euphrates River, like the town of Manbij that you see on this map here of Syria. And Alan Cavell, now you have Turkey's president saying they're going to hit the pause button on any offensive on northeast Syria. Why?
Well, firstly, I think the Turks were not expecting as much from Trump. They knew that they wanted some, maybe a lighter footprint on the ground, something like that, less support, less diplomatic support, but not such a sudden move and such a large move. So, well, I'm not sure they're prepared to a wide-scale offensive on northern Syria at the moment, and I'm not sure they're considering it exactly at the moment. So there is that, and also we can think that some other deals, some pressure when when Trump realized that maybe it was not the best idea to pull out so quickly, and that he needed some time at least to make the Kurds able to strike.
It was always a bit of bluster when Turkey said that we're going to send, because sending troops to northeast Syria would effectively have meant putting them in direct confrontation with U.S. forces. It was always, you always thought that was a bit of a bluff.
Well, they would never have entered Syria with U.S. forces on the ground there, with U.S. forces manning checkpoints, posts on the border in strategic places like Manbij and on other towns just across the border on Syria side.
And you wrote a piece in Le Monde where one source tells you that on the American side, this is a Saigon 1975. There's a Saigon 1975 feeling to it. Yeah. Saigon 1975 is when the U.S. abruptly has to pull everybody out of what was then South Vietnam.
That's right, because some political people Kurdish politicians in Syria, people who were trying to handle stabilization efforts, trying to make sure there was water in the pipes in places like Raqqa or other cities that have been liberated from the Islamic State by the Kurdish forces and their allies, received messages from American diplomats telling them, we are leaving tomorrow. I'm sorry, I can't say goodbye. Just good luck, And this is how it felt. They were just leaving.
But are they really leaving tomorrow? Because as you say, they may not be leaving so soon. This is going to
diplomats or civilians, American diplomats there trying to work on all the civilian aspect of the American presence there, stabilization, rebuilding of infrastructures. They left, but you still have American troops on the ground though, and they were not out yet, but getting ready to do so and pull out, and it can take some time, but it started somehow.
I mean, I was talking to people in the American military who were saying, no, it's done. Everything's moving to get the troops out of there, and I think that'll happen very quickly.
So, is it a Saigon 1975 moment?
Well, I think for the YPG, for the Kurds there, absolutely it is. I mean, maybe Erdogan is holding off on his offensive for now, but he considers the YPG to be no different than the PKK, the rebels fighting him on his own turf in Turkey. And he calls it a terrorist organization. In fact, the U.S. calls it a terrorist organization, except when they're fighting ISIS too. So the U.S. got itself in a very complicated situation there, backing those Kurdish factions. And I have to say, you don't hear great things about the way they've been running the territory that they control either. But there's been this fiction that there was actually an Arab force that was joined with the Kurds.
Sure, it's a fiction. It's quite true. Like large numbers of
let's
of
say
the,
maybe I should
Syrian
say there
Democratic
was
forces
a
are
there
Arabs,
was
local
a,
Arabs from
a
the
construct created.
It was created by the Kurds. It was created by the let's say the Kurdish forces that existed since 2011 approximately, and when they started to have this relation with the US, when they started to have this strategic relation with the US to fight ISIS with the coalition, they started to move in Arab-populated territories. So they needed to have local fighters. So it wouldn't look like a Kurdish
But the people
occupation.
who run the show are the YPG.
The commanders are Kurds.
Yeah,
they're,
all right.
they're YPG and they're commanders and they have this military training and they have like, very specific.
And they're very closely allied
ways.
with the PKK.
All right, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham may have sided with Donald Trump when it came to, say, confirming the president's contentious Supreme Court nominees. But on this one, all bets are off.
If this decision is a withdrawal of all of our forces in Syria, now we're dramatically less safe. This is an Obama-like move. Everything I said about withdrawing in Iraq without a residual force came true.
An Obama-like move. Boy, that's quite an insult coming from.
Well, the first thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, but Trump announced he would pull out back in March. So I'm a bit.
April, he said he wanted
April.
to pull out. Yeah.
So I'm a bit surprised by how dramatic everyone's acting. And the other thing is that, as it often happens when it's Trump, there's a lot of noise about it because it's Trump. But the Republicans did not react when Trump cut the refugee program for Syrians, when he cut the aid to Syrians and all of these things. So it's always strange how the news reacts to Trump, how politicians react to Trump when the actual necessity of these troops there isn't discussed as much, and all of these things. Even the media in the US are acting like Fox News acted when Obama pulled out of or decided to pull
Actually,
out.
Fox
think it's
News
quite-
acted that way about this too. They were
Yeah.
very tough on it.
Well, it's quite different because in March, after March, like very serious guarantees have been given to the Kurds in Syria by the US and other coalition states. And the Kurds were said that the US will stay, will remain, that they will support them militarily, they will support the security efforts to fight sleeping cells, ISIS sleeping cells, of course, in the newly liberated territories, and that they will also help them stabilize the area, rebuild the infrastructures. So they were quite sure, only a few weeks ago.
And keep it
that-
out of the hands of the Assad regime.
Yeah, exactly. And that they would use, actually, that the US and other Western nations would use, backed by Saudi by then, would use this territory as an influence tool against Damascus and against Iran as well.
All of which is
So
over
they are
now.
very surprised because this decision that is quite abrupt, it's quite that has been taken so hastily, is actually the exact opposite of what they were said only weeks ago.
And it's also why it's being said that this is handing Syria to Assad, to the Iranians, and to the Russians.
Exactly.
Which it is.
So when you speak with Kurdish officials today, and Ilham Ahmed was here in Paris today to meet with advisors at the Elysee, well, she says, we don't understand. This goes against the interests of the US.
And she's
It's a gift to Iran. It's a gift to Russia.
And she also said, we are holding all these ISIS prisoners. We don't know how long we can hold them without that U.S. backing. Of course,
No, for
she says that in Paris, knowing that a lot of those are French nationals. by the
Absolutely.
way.
Hundreds.
Yeah, I think on the Trump point of view, he's diverting from a lot of things happening nationally, and the timing is clearly because there's a government shutdown and other things going on, and he's the master of manipulating the news and changing the
This
topic.
diversion will have massive consequences,
Of course,
not on the US, but on Europe. Because what's going on there is that if the US pull out, if there is chaos and destabilization, well, you have jihadists that will be freed, for example, from the prison, or that will try to escape, and then go to Europe.
Henri Pierre Mafoudou.
Yes, and also to Alain's point, from a political perspective, Jim Mattis has been seen as the sober voice of the government, the island of stability. So he's kind of the last one to leave. And now people actually believe that Trump will probably surround himself more with political thinkers and operators. So that's a big shift because, you know, when you think about Jim Mattis, he was more pro-NATO. Even at his first meeting with Trump before even he actually nominated him, he was against torture. He was more towards NATO and international traditional allies. So that's kind of a big shift, not only for what's happening in Syria, but also for Iran and beyond. Because there was Rex Tillerson, gone. And now Mattis, I think it's quite a vision. And Kelly.
So who's the next defense secretary?
I don't know. I don't care. He's gonna, honestly, it'll be Trump. He'll be his own defense secretary. I mean, this is not only Trump it's not only letting Trump be Trump. I mean, he wants to run the whole show, and he wants to run it with his gut, with his instinct. That's a hell of a way, especially if you're as stupid as he is about international affairs. That's a hell of a way to run an international power.
All right, there is one leader who is not complaining about this. Let's cross over to the Kremlin, please.
Ah, they love it.
Whether we need the presence of the American military, I guess we do not need that presence. The presence of US troops is illegitimate. It has not been confirmed by United Nations Security Council. Only the Security Council can make this decision. Or you can be there on the invitation of the Syrian government. And we are there on the invitation of the Syrian government. The US does not have either of those decisions, so if the US has decided to leave Syria, that is the right decision.
That is the right decision, but don't believe it, says Trump himself in a tweet he put out on Thursday. He said Russia, Iran, and Syria and many others are not happy about the U.S. leaving, despite what the fake news, capital F, capital N, says, because now they will have to fight ISIS and others who they hate without us.
Okay. Not very accurate.
Right, look.
No, but is there a logic to this, which is that it's the idea that, hey, we got bogged down in Afghanistan, we got bogged down in Iraq, you're about to get bogged down in Syria.
You mean the Russians are going to get bogged down? That's been the theory, but in fact that hasn't been the case. They have advanced their arms, they've advanced their command structures. If you want to get to the top of the Russian military, you do a little time serving in Syria. They have killed thousands of people and haven't been held to account for it. And for Putin to talk about national or international legitimacy, I don't think the UN Security Council invited Russia into Crimea. I don't think the UNSC invited them into the Donbass in eastern Ukraine. I don't think any of that holds true at all. But Russia is gloating right now. They are so happy about this. Not only Syria, but Mattis, because he was the last really strong voice against
But
them.
again, could it be a case of be careful what you wish for?
I'll be totally honest with you, Francois. When I read this tweet, it's 2020 written all over it. It's all about he doesn't want to have any more troops in there. He's going to say, I'll bring back those troops home. It's 2020 all over it.
It's all about domestic politics and the presidential election next time around.
The new Congress is about to be sworn in coming weeks. He just want to get them out of the way.
Sure.
Aida Lamy, for years we've been saying the U.S. They're always whenever there's a problem somewhere around the world, their answer is to send in the Marines and send in the military.
And they've done a lot of damage to the world.
Right. Here it's the opposite. We haven't even talked about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, how do you not stay forever?
Yeah, it's a good question.
It's not the same kind of war. Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, it's completely different. The idea in Iraq was to do regime change, to occupy an old country, and to be there, to stay there somehow, and to have a real influence on it, with massive amounts of troops. Syria is 2,000 men in a corner of Syria, and the sole aim of this presence was to be in, let's say, some sorts of balance in front of the Iranians and the Russians on one side, and another balance toward Turkey on the other side. So now the balance of power in Syria, it used to have 3 players. It now has only 2 players, and it's a massive strategic void in the northeast, an area which is large and rich in all sorts of resources, be it oil, gas, agriculture, water. That is now going to be like a prize for a free-for-all from the Russians, the Iranians, and the Turks.
It's an anonymous view of what may happen in Syria. We're going to see just this changing world order, how it's playing out in other parts of the globe. When we come back, we'll go to China. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Chris Verdicki, foreign editor, is with us, wearing his casual Friday wear.
Yes.
And by the way, Chris, apologies. I know you like to talk about Brexit each week. We don't have Brexit on the menu.
Oh, darn. Oh.
But don't worry.
Such an
have no
interesting
fear.
subject.
It'll be back in the new year. Alan Cavall, who's a journalist for newspaper Le Monde, is with us as well. Welcome back to Aida Alami, contributor to the New York Times. And France 24's Henri-Pierre Mafoulou. We were talking before the break about the change with Donald Trump's decision to withdraw militarily from places like Syria and at least have a drawdown from Afghanistan. Alan Cavall, you said that Europe is, of course, the party that's going to be weakened by all this. If you look at the grand picture of things, there's a global player that we haven't talked about in this changing world order, and that's China, which this week marked the 40th anniversary of Deng Xiaoping's decision to open up the economy. And yes, times sure have changed.
In a country like China, with a history that goes back over 5,000 years and a population of more than 1.3 billion, there are no textbooks that enclose the golden rules for reforms and development. No one can dictate to the Chinese people what should or should not be done.
No one can dictate to the Chinese people what should or should not be done. These two events in the same week, Donald Trump withdrawing militarily, the Chinese with this very strong speech by Xi Jinping. If you were a critic, you might even say it with imperialist tones in it.
You wouldn't have to be a critic.
It shows how much the world is changing.
Well, yeah, the world is changing, and it's changing very quickly. I think faster even than Xi Jinping, or certainly than Donald Trump, were ever prepared for. There are all kinds of disruptions going on. But I think the important thing with China to understand is that Xi Jinping basically has taken over a country that for a long time was sort of on the edge of the liberal order, the liberal world order. There was always this idea that commerce, that trade, development would move countries toward greater democracy, greater openness, better respect for human rights. What the Chinese have showed us is that that's not true. The trade, development, all that, that's about making money. And if you make enough money, you can do huge things with it. Also, the Chinese market, the internal market in China, is getting bigger and stronger all the time. So their dependence on the liberal order, trade with the liberal order, is actually diminishing to some extent. And they have Xi Jinping's great plans to build and expand Chinese influence throughout the world, especially through poorer countries in Asia and in Africa. So you have this situation of Chinese expansionism that essentially is destined or determined to replace what we call the liberal world order. And then you have an American president who has no idea what the liberal world order is or how it was constructed or the way alliances were built to sustain it. And in fact, who is intent on destroying those alliances, maybe for the benefit of Russia. So all of that's going on, and we are really at a critical moment. It's a fairly desperate time. And happy holidays, by the way.
Thank you. Where does that leave Africa? Because a few years back, everybody was saying, oh, the Chinese are taking over everything in Africa. Now there's blowback, most notably over those big infrastructure projects and the debt trap they incur. When they see this paradigm of the U.S. the way it is, China the way it is, what's the view?
Man, nowhere to be seen. I mean, China has this grand plan, as Christopher was saying. I don't think it would change by a dime at all, for a simple reason, because he's more focused on his grip to power, centralize his power, rather than worrying about the Africa right now. This speech this week, this Tuesday, was actually for his domestic audience. And perhaps, if you want, about the trade war going on. And what I have noticed, there is no concession whatsoever when it comes to stuff such as the soybeans, the American product, reduce U.S. tariffs. It's all about that. Africa is nowhere to be seen there. It's me, myself, and Xi Jinping, just trying to, not to clinch to power because he has already reinforced it, but really just saying, I'm there, I'm here to stay, and you have to deal with me. And I am the next Mao for the next 40 years. This is what has to come, and has to leave it to them.
We're sitting here in Paris, and we're sort of in between these two. The flux that we're seeing, a China where the power is more and more centralized in the hands of one single person, and the United States where, well, we're not quite sure where it's going.
Yeah, it's not a great position to be in. But to be quite honest, I don't know much about China, but all I can think of are all the human rights violations and the treatment of Muslim minorities and all of that. And it's hard to side with, one of the powers. Like, kind of think, is this one? Is it? Do they counterbalance each other? I don't know.
All right. Well,
but I think that's exactly what he was talking about in the speech. The excerpt you played is that we're not going to be told how to run our country. We're not going to be told how to do any of this. I think you also have to remember, look at this. It's still a communist country. It may be communist a la chinoise, but it's communist. It is a unified party movement. And what he represents is the power of the party to run that country and to run, he hopes, a large part of the world.
All right, we're going to turn now to an election that's 2 years overdue, 2 years and an extra week.
The presidential, legislative, and provincial votes will take place on the 30th of December 2018.
On tenterhooks after the Electoral Commission in Congo cited what it calls a technical impasse. That suspicious fire that destroyed 80% of the capital's voting materials, including those electronic voting machines. The vote initially scheduled for this coming Sunday pushed back an extra week. Henri-Pierre Mafoulou, this is a case where if you're in the opposition or if you're a human rights campaigner and you've seen the disintegration of the Congolese state take place over years and decades, it's at the same time a very flawed election. And on the other hand, what do? Do you boycott? Do you take part? And the opposition this Friday saying, look, we want it to happen.
To be totally honest with you, Francois, this has all ingredients of a Netflix series. All over it. I mean, from a political perspective, you name it, the voting machines blowing out of the fire, even as today, name callings, lies, talking about Corneille Nangaa, the head of the
National Electoral Commission.
National Electoral Commission has to resign. From a humanitarian perspective, if you think about the Ebola outbreak happening at the same time, as if we were not lucky enough, so to speak. Security perspective, there were ethnic violence just this week in the western part of Congo.
Yeah, it's very underreported. There were more than 100 killed.
Almost 100 killed,
yeah.
Indeed. And besides candidates, not only talking about the one from Geneva who split over the agreement from November 11th, but being stopped in the campaign. The actual campaign should finish today. The official end of the campaign is today. But it was stopped already since Wednesday. So
in the capital.
In the capital, of course. But all main candidates were all rubbing themselves with all their party supporters towards the capital for the big show, the final call. But here we go again.
This is a country independent from Belgium in 1960, and it would be the first time. I still put it in the conditional because the election hasn't happened yet. The first time that we have a peaceful transition through the ballot box. What's going to happen in the next week? And also, when we talked about it in this very set, there were the worries of what's going to happen after the ballots have been cast.
Well, the key words in that is the voting machines. I mean, there have been so many calls, suspicions, name calling over it.
Yeah,
Not even
electronic
sure
voting machines with a short battery life, I'm told.
I mean, when you have a country that has about 10% of electricity, cover the whole country. I mean, where
It
does
sounds
it
like
go
North
from
Carolina. I mean, it's
there? No, I mean, I think that you can talk to any camps, either the Fayulu camps, who's the joint candidate that came out from Geneva, from the Tshisekedi camp, as well from even the ruling party. I mean, they will only accept their victory, which means that it's taking us nowhere. But
So what, it's going to be like what we saw in Kenya where nobody recognizes the other one and we have lots of post-electoral violence? Is there a way to avoid that?
I mean, it's difficult to speculate over that, but one thing for sure is that this is a third postponement of the election. It was supposed to happen in 2016. Then for technical reason, it was postponed in first time, then a second time. You know what? There's a little bit of glimmer of hope in the sense that this time is just a week. But the truth of the matter is that they were planning for this election to be held before the end of 2018. So maybe we should have a meeting next week here and see whether promises made, promises kept. But seems to me it's a bit doubtful because I've been talking to my own sources saying that, technically speaking, maybe we'll need 2 weeks rather than one. So just wait and see.
Just wait and see. And these electoral processes, in the case of Congo, we see that obviously there's been a lot of suspicion over the fact that it's so unruly, that some's calling it, well, organized chaos in a way, that the chaos was fomented.
Well, yes, very possibly that's true. I mean, that's a standard tactic if you want to vitiate in one way or another the results of an election. And if you create enough chaos, then you can step in at some point and say, well, we're going to reimpose order because we think this is the person who actually won. Maybe that'll be the game there. But I wasn't kidding when I said this reminds me of North Carolina, where all kinds of shenanigans have gone on. There's been all kinds of craziness in the American electoral system. And in fact, in the United States, which used to be held up as an example to countries trying to move toward democracy, like Democratic Republic of Congo, I don't think we have a lot to teach anybody anymore. It's really very depressing. More good news for the holidays.
More good news for the holidays. Aidalami, the idea of holding elections, is there another way to go about having representative government? Because we're not getting anywhere right now, it sounds like.
I was thinking about this earlier and how tricky it is because, in one hand, you don't want foreign intervention in any country's elections, and you don't because I've read an op-ed that was calling for that kind of foreign intervention, like you need to force them to have an election.
It's already got the world's largest UN peacekeeping force,
right,
DR Congo,
right.
Most of it in the east.
Right, and at the same time, there's so many problems to be solved, and I think it's hard. It's a hard question to answer in the sense that this was a very hopeful time. Do you agree for the country in a way? Yeah.
In the sense that,
yeah.
Going back to your point about the fusing any foreign intervention, militarily speaking, but in terms of organizing the actual electoral process, refusing the EU,
the National Electoral Commission said we don't want any outside help.
No intervention.
Why did they say that?
So they had the money to organize it. That's what we've been hearing so far. So,
Well, no, I think that there's a lot of confusion about democracy these days. Also, if you look at France, the whole movement now to start trying to rule by referendum, that would be really exciting.
Rejecting representative democracy and find other solutions.
Yeah, it's that, to my mind, would be completely disastrous. That's sort of like the electoral version of mob rule. But
Alan Cavall, the story in Congo, it should be top of the news here in France. This is, after all, the world's number one francophone country we're talking about. There's a bit of Congo in all of our telephones, what with the precious minerals that are used to make batteries and the such. And yet, it's not registering that much, it seems. The French public is not following this that closely.
That's right. That's right. And we cannot say that it's because of the complexity of the situation, because the situation in the Middle East is as much as complex as, not more complex than that, not less complex, sorry, than that. And I think that maybe, like important security, financial, economic stakes are not there for France. When you look at the Middle East, like stories that are covered quite a bit, that have been covered quite a bit over the past few years, I think the interest to it was linked to the fact that there was attacks in Paris, that French citizens were members of the Islamic State, and senior members. You don't find that in other places in the world that are underreported, like Congo, for example, but all sorts of things happening in South America as well. Not speaking about Brazil, but more local issues. Of course, there is a hierarchy to the news, and I think it is dictated by the worries of the French population.
Henri-Pierre Mafoudou?
But what kind of bigger stage can we have or expect to have when you just had the Dr. Mukwege, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize? It was just like 10 days ago. He was previously a Sakharov also laureate. I mean, and he said it all. I mean, you can just read between the lines. It was talking about the lack of credibility for this election. So, I mean, if it's not now, then when? That is the big question.
Denis Mukwege, who's survived
3
assassination attempts, and he's really been outspoken in this case.
I mean, apart from naming people, but we could clearly see, I mean, he targeted the government in place. The international community was just turning a blind eye towards what's happening, talking about massacres, talking, as you said, about all those natural resources. I mean, what bigger stage than this if it doesn't happen now? But I mean, now we heard that Mr. Kabila might be coming back even sooner than people have expected. So, it doesn't get better than this. So, I mean, if it doesn't happen now, I will be a bit worried about the coming days, because there is no way that, I mean, in just 48 hours, they found out that it was not working, while they was keep promising. That's why the opposition want to take them all the way to what they promised. But as far as I'm concerned, from my own perspective, I believe that this will not happen the following week.
It's not going to happen December 30th.
I mean, this country is like 4 times the size of France, like literally the size of Western Europe. I mean, with 10% electricity and still complaining about voting machines just in the capital. I mean,
because they've held presidential elections there before, albeit flawed ones.
As you said it.
For less than 24 hours, it seemed like there would be some Christmas cheer for one man, Renault Nissan's disgraced boss. But then the Japanese rearrested Carlos Ghosn on other corruption-related charges. No Christmas bonus for the longtime boss of U.S. television network CBS. Les Moonves fired on Monday over a string of sexual misconduct allegations. He's also been denied a $120 million severance package. Speaking of severance pay, this was the week Manchester United sacked Jose Mourinho, and even though the coach known as the Special One had led the Red Devils to their worst start in 28 years, UK media estimate his compensation somewhere north of £18 million. The press has also been scrutinizing his lifestyle at United. Mourinho opting to live during his 2 years in charge at a hotel, not just any hotel, £813 a night, his suite at the Lowry Hotel. And it brings up the question of compensation when you're fired for effectively not doing your job. Now, I know it's written into the contract, but £18 million, Alan Cavall, for severance pay. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's maybe more than the US spends in Syria.
Good comparison.
It's crazy money when you're talking about.
It's not the first time when it comes to Mourinho. I mean, they're talking now about 70 million euros. I mean, with his 2 sprees in at Chelsea Football Club, for the same amount of time, 2 years and a half every time. So he seems to be quite good when it comes to cashing in. 70 million.
The subject of severance pay comes up often, Christopher Dickey. It comes up every year when the big Wall Street investment banks announce their bonuses for the year as well. In the case of Mourinho and Moonves, it's two different tales, though, right now. Moonves is, of course, something a lot more serious than
120 million bucks and a long record of sexual harassment and worse. Yeah, it's
How
worse.
close do you think he got to getting
worse
that
than a
120
losing
million?
season.
Do you think he could still get that 120 million?
Well, he's going to contest it. He's going to fight for it. And, in the world of television, he was seen as a great genius who had helped take CBS from the bottom of the ratings to the top. And that's worth a hell of a lot of money in America. And that's one of the reasons that he was given a pass for such a long time, as rumors circulated about his private life or not so private life. Now, we live in a different era where it's amazing how many of the mighty have fallen and also how much they've gotten paid after they fell. Tens of millions of dollars in many cases, whether we're talking about Matt Lauer at NBC or Moonves at CBS or Charlie Rose at CBS. I mean, it goes on and on. There's a long record. What it really tells people, though, is the huge discrepancy between what executives make in America and what working people make in America. And it is enormous, and it's getting more enormous all the time. If you look at the record over the last 30 or 40 years, the discrepancy that used to be between bosses and workers, what used to be like this, that's like this. And people feel it. That's what the whole 1% debate is about, what the whole Occupy Wall Street thing was about in its time.
And the yellow vest to a certain
The yellow vest.
We live in this new era of transparency where before, when there were these deals, you didn't know about it.
Yeah, and maybe it's better that we know about it at least. Of course, it creates anger, it creates sometimes violence when this anger boils up. But I guess that this transparency should not be something we condemn. It's something necessary.
You agree, Aida Alami?
Yeah.
Because these inequalities create chaos. These inequalities create Donald Trump. These inequalities create Brexit. These inequalities create, and these decisions of, for example, in Syria, linked to Donald Trump, linked to elections, linked to this social situation, linked to these inequalities. So it's at the root of every topic we've been talking about tonight, actually.
Yeah, so the fault is not with the transparency as such. The fault is with the inequality.
Well, it is, but it's certainly not the fault of the transparency, but it's also that we live in a time of the politics of emotion, where people are not reacting to reason, they are reacting to emotional arguments. And, I am not in favor of this huge discrepancy between the rich and the poor, but you can seize on that and use it. I mean, what is Donald Trump? He's a self-declared billionaire with a family company who won't tell us what his taxes are.
Exactly, yeah.
He won't expose any of it. And yet he is the great paladin, the great savior of the poor in the United States.
What about Nigel Farage?
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's an exploitation of resentment by the politics of emotion.
To bring it back to Mourinho and to football, the huge salary discrepancy. People were talking about financial fair play here in Paris until Qatar bought the Paris Saint-Germain football club. And now people don't seem to mind the huge salaries, all the zeros, as long as their team is winning.
I mean, I'm probably not going to earn myself any friends here talking about this, but when you think about the huge money invested in football, it's all about TV rights. And as to Chris' point, when you even think about the amount of money, billions, that Leslie Moonves has made for CBS, 120 millions, sorry for saying that, is probably just a drop in the bucket. It's nothing. When you think about the amount of people, yesterday there was a study about 1 billion people just watching the World Cup final. Imagine the amount of money all those companies, I probably cannot name here, are making. It's nothing. As as emotional as it is also another reality that people, I think, should take more into consideration. It does shock, but even think about Carlos Ghosn. I mean, how many Nissan or Renault did they sell this past year? Not even the past 10 years. So I'm not saying I'm for huge salary, but,
Sure,
I think we could find some middle ground.
Why would one single person own so much? I mean, big bosses in the 60s and the 50s, they were making a lot of money. And they were not paid that much.
Yeah.
And the inequalities were
Everyone around this table would settle for a cool million, I think, but that would do us nicely.
How often?
We're going to leave it there. That'll give us some Christmas cheer. Think about that. Christopher Dickey, I want to thank you. Aïda Alami, Henri-Pierre Mafoudou, Alain Caval. Stay with us. There's more to come here on France 24. And join us next week. We'll have a special year-end edition.